I remember the sound before anything else. Not the scream, not the gunshot. The hum. A low, unstable vibration running through the walls, like the island itself was struggling to stay awake. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, seeping into the air, into my chest, into the quiet spaces between thoughts. The lights flickered once, twice. Then everything went dark. I raised my weapon on instinct, my heart already racing before my mind had time to catch up. Somewhere down the corridor, glass shattered. Someone shouted my name. Another voice cried out in panic, sharp and desperate. Retention. Immediate sensory chaos to anchor attention in the first 20-30 seconds. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. This wasn't a party anymore. And this island was no longer safe. 3 days earlier, I would have laughed if someone told me this trip would end with blood on marble floors and bodies hidden in the dark. I would have said they watched too many movies, trusted fear more than logic. 3 days earlier, I was still convincing myself that love didn't have an age limit. I had always been the kind of woman who noticed things early. Too early, some would say. I noticed when people lied by omission, when a room shifted because someone important had entered, when silence meant more than words. At 25, I was already a police officer, barely out of training but consistently outperforming people twice my age. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't arrogant. I was observant. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed patterns, habits, silences. It was why my superiors trusted me, and why I trusted myself. Which made the irony hard to ignore. Because despite all my discipline, all my principles, I had fallen for a man I never thought I would even give a second glance. He was 45. A billionaire. Confident in a way that didn't need to announce itself. Calm, controlled, always a step ahead of the room without ever appearing dominant. The kind of man people leaned toward when he spoke, even when his voice was low. I used to criticize men like him. Too old, too powerful, too used to getting what they wanted. And yet somehow, he never made me feel small. When we met, he didn't impress me with his wealth. He impressed me by listening, by asking questions that weren't rehearsed, by remembering details I mentioned only once and never bringing them up as trophies, just as understanding. With him, I felt seen. Or at least, that's what I believed. The invitation came a few weeks into our relationship, almost casually, as if it were an afterthought rather than something meticulously planned. A private island, a small gathering, 3 days of celebration, away from the noise of the world. I hesitated, not because of the luxury, but because isolation makes me uneasy. As a police officer, distance from help is never comforting. You learn early that when things go wrong, they go wrong fast, and distance multiplies damage. He smiled when I voiced my concern, the kind of smile that softened resistance rather than challenged it. Nothing could go wrong, he said gently. And if it did, I'd feel safer knowing you're there. Retention, emotional hook, validation of protagonist's role. I told myself that was romantic. The island was breathtaking. White sand stretched endlessly along the shore, untouched, pristine. Deep blue water surrounded it like a promise and a warning at the same time. Palm trees moved lazily in the breeze, indifferent to human intentions. A single modern estate sat near the highest point, its glass walls reflecting the sun like something unreal, like a mirage designed to impress from a distance. Guests arrived by yacht and helicopter, dressed in elegance that felt effortless. Businessmen, investors, old friends, people who spoke in calm tones about money most people would never see in a lifetime, as if they were discussing the weather. They greeted me warmly, though I noticed the curiosity behind their smiles. The young girlfriend, the police officer, the outsider. I didn't mind. I never had. The first day unfolded exactly as planned. Luggage was taken, rooms were assigned. Staff moved quietly, efficiently, trained to blend into the background. Champagne flowed in the grand hall as conversations overlapped, polished and superficial. I watched. Always watching. I noticed who avoided whom, who stood too close to the exits, who drank too much, too fast, who barely drank at all, who scanned the room before choosing where to sit. Retention. Subtle investigation mindset to keep listener engaged. His business partner stood out. The partner was polished, charming, and precise. He spoke confidently, laughed at the right moments, and never stayed too long in one place. He seemed to know when to leave a conversation before it became revealing. They were equals, at least on the surface. Two men who had built something massive together, now standing side by side like nothing could divide them. That night, as the sun sank into the horizon and the sky burned orange and gold, we stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean. Music drifted softly from inside. Laughter carried on the air. "This feels unreal," I admitted. He smiled. "That's the idea." I should have noticed how carefully he chose his words. The second day began with silence. No buzzing phones, no emails, no notifications. At first, it felt refreshing. A rare pause from constant connection. People joked about it, made light of the inconvenience. Then it became inconvenient, then concerning. The power flickered mid-morning. Lights dimmed, came back, dimmed again. Conversations paused briefly, then resumed when nothing immediately happened. Staff reassured everyone. A generator issue. Nothing serious. But as the hours passed, frustration grew. No internet, no cellular signal. Radio's dead. The island was far enough from the mainland that help couldn't arrive quickly, even if we could call for it. I watched faces change as that reality settled in. By afternoon, the power went out completely. That was when fear quietly entered the room. Not panic yet. Fear doesn't start loud. It starts with glances, with whispered questions, with people realizing how dependent they are on systems they never think about until they disappear. Then someone screamed. The sound cut through the estate, raw and sharp, instantly silencing every other noise. They found him near the service wing, one of the guests, a businessman, lying still, eyes open, skin already cooling. His body was positioned too neatly, as if someone had taken time arranging him. No signs of struggle, no obvious weapon, no explanation. I knelt beside the body, my training taking over while others froze. I checked vitals I already knew weren't there. I scanned the area, the walls, the floor. This wasn't an accident. The position was deliberate, the timing precise. I ordered everyone back to the main hall. I asked for security. No response. One guard was missing. Then another. Then all of them. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all understood. The people meant to protect us were gone. Retention. Isolation, plus vulnerability, escalation. The night closed in fast. Without power, the estate transformed. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. Hallways felt longer, narrower. The sound of the ocean became oppressive instead of soothing, crashing against the rocks like a countdown. We stayed together. Or tried to. Some people argued, some cried, some stared at nothing, lost in their own thoughts. Then the second body appeared, closer this time, then the third, each death more unsettling than the last. Still no chaos, still no mess, just silence, as if someone wanted us afraid, but controlled. I could feel the island tightening around us, like a trap snapping shut one click at a time. I watched my boyfriend closely. He was shaken, protective, stayed near me, trusted my instincts, followed my lead without question. When I spoke, he listened. When I moved, he stayed close. I told myself that meant something. When I caught the movement near the west corridor, my body reacted before my thoughts. I saw the shadow. I heard the breath. I tackled him just as he raised the weapon. We hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through my shoulder, but training took over. I disarmed him in seconds, pinning him before he could recover. When I pulled off the mask, my blood ran cold. He was one of the security guards, alive, silent, and staring at me with something that wasn't fear. It was acceptance. He never said a word. He didn't resist. That was the part that stayed with me long after everything else blurred together. When I tightened the cuffs around his wrists, he didn't struggle, didn't plead, didn't even curse under his breath. His body followed the motion automatically, as if he had rehearsed this moment and already accepted its ending. His eyes weren't fixed on me. They stared past me, unfocused, like someone watching a memory instead of the present. Retention, unsettling calm in antagonist, creates psychological discomfort. I searched him quickly, methodically. No phone, no radio, no identification beyond the uniform I already recognized. No personal effects at all. He carried himself like a tool, not a person. Security, supposedly hired to protect us. I pulled him to his feet and dragged him back toward the main hall. His boots scraped against the floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the empty corridors. Each step felt amplified, as if the island itself were listening. When we entered the hall, every conversation died instantly. People stepped back without realizing they were doing it. Fear pulled them closer together and pushed them away at the same time. "He tried to kill him," someone whispered, their voice shaking. I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it. I watched the man's eyes instead. Nothing. No fear, no panic, no anger. Just silence. I demanded answers. I told him this was his chance to live. I told him whatever deal he thought he had was over. He didn't react. That silence wasn't loyalty. It wasn't defiance. It was instruction. Someone had told him exactly what to do if this moment came, exactly what not to say. That realization settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. I secured him in a storage room near the service wing, reinforced the door with whatever we could find, and assigned 2 people to keep watch. Not because I trusted them, but because I needed eyes everywhere. Without power, without outside contact, without security, we were exposed. And someone among us knew exactly how exposed we were. I gathered everyone and forced structure where chaos threatened to take over. We stayed in groups. No one moved alone. Lights were rationed. Doors were marked. Paths were planned. Fear makes people careless. Order makes them predictable. Retention, survival logic, keeps listener cognitively engaged. As the night stretched on, patterns began to emerge. The victims weren't random. Each one had ties to the same industry, the same recent financial negotiations, the same quiet disputes that never made headlines but moved enormous amounts of money behind closed doors. I remembered the conversations from the first night, the subtle tension masked by polite smiles, the moments where laughter came too late or ended too quickly. And then there was the partner. He had been present every time a body was discovered, not hovering, not hiding, just close enough to notice. Calm, helpful. Always asking the right questions, never too many. Too right. When fear takes hold, people unravel. They cry, they accuse, they lash out at the nearest target. He did none of those things. Instead, he positioned himself as a voice of reason. "We need structure," he said quietly, stepping forward when the murmurs grew too loud. "We can't let panic do more damage than whoever started this." People listened. They always do when someone sounds confident in moments of uncertainty. I watched him from across the room as he spoke to small groups, organizing watch shifts, suggesting who should stay where, who should rest, who should stay alert. He didn't give orders. He offered solutions. Control disguised as calm. Retention, subtle villain framing without confirmation. At some point after midnight, the hum returned. Low. Unstable. Familiar. Lights flickered once, then surged back on, flooding the estate with harsh, blinding brightness. Several people gasped. One woman cried openly, overwhelmed by the sudden shift. Radios crackled to life. The satellite phone rang almost immediately, shrill and intrusive. Help was coming. Boats, helicopters, authorities. Relief swept through the survivors like a physical force. People collapsed into chairs, leaned against walls, laughed nervously, hugged strangers as if they had known them their entire lives. For the first time since the first scream, the island felt smaller, less threatening. And with that relief came certainty. I replayed everything in my mind, faster now, sharper. The timeline, the access points, the moments when each victim had been alone, the way security disappeared without resistance. The guard didn't act alone. He was a weapon. Someone else had aimed him. The evidence pointed in one direction. When the authorities arrived at dawn, I walked them through everything. Calmly. Precisely. I handed over what little evidence we had, explained the patterns, the financial ties, the behavior that didn't fit panic. The partner was taken aside, questioned, separated, watched. He denied everything, of course. His surprise looked genuine, his indignation carefully measured. He spoke about betrayal, about being shocked, about trusting the wrong people. But denial doesn't erase patterns. By mid-morning, he was in cuffs. The island felt different once the danger had a name. The air seemed lighter. People spoke louder, laughed more freely, hugged one another like survivors of a storm that had passed just inches from destroying them. They looked at me differently now, with gratitude, with admiration, with relief that someone had taken control when everything threatened to fall apart. Someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the room filled with applause, hesitant at first, then stronger, more confident. It echoed against the glass walls and marble floors, almost overwhelming. I stood there, exhausted, adrenaline finally draining from my system, my hands shaking slightly now that I no longer needed them steady. He came to me then. My boyfriend. He wrapped his arms around me tightly, holding me as if I might disappear if he let go. His breath was uneven against my hair. His hands trembled. "You saved my life," he whispered. Pride swelled in my chest, sharp and unexpected. I had done my job. I had trusted my instincts. I had protected the people around me. That's what I told myself. We left the island later that day. The ocean looked peaceful again, almost mocking in its beauty. Sunlight danced across the water as if nothing had happened, as if the island hadn't swallowed fear and blood just hours before. Back in the city, the world resumed its rhythm without hesitation. Traffic, noise, crowds. Normal life pressed in from all sides, demanding attention, refusing to acknowledge what we had survived. But my mind refused to move on. Something felt wrong, not in the obvious way, not in the way nightmares announce themselves or panic attacks seize your breath. In the quiet spaces, the pauses between thoughts, the moments when memory didn't align perfectly. The timing was too perfect. The power outage, the disappearance of security, the return of energy at the exact moment the narrative resolved, the arrival of help just in time to confirm the conclusion we had already reached. It felt rehearsed. I started reviewing the case unofficially. At first, it was just habit, a way to decompress, something to keep my hands busy and my thoughts occupied. Small things, logs, maintenance schedules, access permissions, financial connections I hadn't bothered tracing before. Late nights turned into early mornings. Coffee grew cold beside me as files stacked up. Screens blurred as I stared too long without blinking. And slowly, reluctantly, the truth emerged. The security guard had been paid, not by the partner, by my boyfriend. The generator failure wasn't accidental. The maintenance request had been approved days before the trip, routed through a subsidiary no one questioned. The guard's silence wasn't loyalty to a cause. It was a contract. The victims weren't random obstacles caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were competition. Men standing in the way of a takeover that would never appear in public as violence, but as opportunity. I sat alone in my apartment when the final piece fell into place. The city quiet outside my window, unaware that my entire understanding of the past weeks had just collapsed. My hands trembled as I stared at the evidence. The partner had been framed. And the island. The island had been a stage. The realization hurt more than fear ever had. Because it wasn't just business. It was personal. I wasn't collateral damage. I was part of the design. I didn't sleep that night. The city outside my window moved forward without hesitation. Headlights sliding across wet pavement. Distant sirens fading into the background like a reminder that emergencies were always happening somewhere else. Life continued at its usual pace, indifferent to the fact that my entire understanding of the past weeks had just collapsed. I sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop open, papers spread around me, cold coffee untouched. The screen glowed softly in the dim light as I reread the same files over and over, hoping my eyes had betrayed me, hoping there was a detail I'd missed that would rearrange everything into something less unbearable. But the truth didn't change. The money transfers were real. The maintenance orders were signed. The security guard's contract traced back to a shell company that led directly to him, my boyfriend, the man I had trusted, the man I had defended, the man whose life I believed I had saved. Retention. Emotional inversion. Protector becomes architect. The island hadn't been a trap for us. It had been a trap for them, the partner, the competitors, the men who stood between him and a financial expansion that would never appear in headlines as murder, but as a brilliant strategic move once the dust settled. And I had been the perfect cover, a young police officer, a devoted girlfriend, a credible witness whose presence validated every step of the investigation without ever raising suspicion. I had unknowingly solved the crime exactly the way he needed it solved. The realization pressed down on my chest until breathing felt deliberate. Every memory replayed itself with a different weight now, stripped of innocence. I replayed every conversation we had ever had, every smile that lingered just long enough to feel warm, every reassuring touch that steadied me when things felt uncertain, every moment where I thought I saw vulnerability in his eyes. It all felt different now, calculated, measured, controlled. Even our age difference took on a new meaning. I had seen it as unlikely love, something imperfect but genuine. He had seen it as advantage, youth paired with credibility, innocence paired with authority. Retention. Reframing past details invites listener to reassess entire story. I stood up and paced the apartment, my footsteps soft against the floor, my thoughts spiraling between anger and shame. How could I have missed it? The answer didn't arrive loudly. It came quietly. Because I didn't want to see it. When you love someone, you don't interrogate their silences. You fill them with trust. You excuse what doesn't fit because the alternative hurts too much. You convince yourself that intuition can wait, that suspicion is disrespectful, that love deserves the benefit of the doubt. I knew what I had to do, and I hated it. Turning him in meant destroying everything we had built, or thought we had built. It meant admitting to my superiors that I had been emotionally compromised, that my judgment, however sharp, had been influenced at the worst possible moment. It meant risking my career, but not doing it meant becoming complicit. And I refused to be that. I gathered everything, every document, every transaction, every timeline. I organized it carefully, the way I would any case that mattered, because this one mattered more than any before. Not just because of the bodies or the betrayal, but because of what it said about me if I chose silence. Retention, moral dilemma, audience leans in. When I walked into my supervisor's office, my hands were steady. My voice was not. I told them everything, about the island, about the investigation, about the evidence I uncovered afterward. I didn't defend myself. I didn't justify my choices. I didn't ask for leniency. I just presented the truth. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation could have been. No one interrupted. No one rushed to conclusions. They took the files, reviewed them carefully, asked precise questions that cut straight through emotion. They checked every detail. Days passed. He didn't know yet. He still called me, texted me, left messages asking when we would talk, when I would come over, when things would go back to normal. I didn't answer. Each message tightened something inside me, but I didn't waver. I had learned what hesitation cost on that island. When they finally moved, it was fast. Arrest warrants were issued quietly. Accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. Public statements were drafted with surgical care, designed to avoid panic, to avoid naming names until there was no room for doubt. I wasn't there when they took him in. I didn't want my last image of him to be that moment. The look I imagined on his face when control finally slipped from his hands. The partner was released within hours. Charges dropped. Apologies issued, though none of them could erase the fear, the humiliation, or the suspicion he had lived under since the island. The headlines were brutal. A visionary billionaire exposed. A private island massacre revealed as corporate manipulation. A police officer unknowingly entangled in the scheme. My name appeared briefly, then disappeared, buried under legal language, sealed records, and deliberate ambiguity. Internally, there were investigations, psychological evaluations, ethics reviews, long conversations behind closed doors where my career hung quietly in the balance. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with doubt. But the evidence spoke louder than opinions. I kept my badge. Barely. Retention. Consequence without full punishment. Realism. Weeks later, I stood alone on a quiet street near the harbor, watching boats drift in and out, their lights reflecting softly on the water. The ocean had never looked threatening here, just endless, indifferent. I thought about the island, how beautiful it had been, how carefully curated every detail had felt, how quickly paradise had turned into something else. I thought about the applause, the praise, the pride I felt when I believed I had saved everyone. And I understood something that hurt more than betrayal. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones we're told. They're the ones we participate in without realizing it. He never forced me to trust him. He never demanded loyalty. He simply offered enough truth to let me build the lie myself. That realization didn't break me, but it changed me. I still believe in justice. I still believe in my work. But I no longer believe that evil announces itself with cruelty or chaos. Sometimes it wears a calm smile. Sometimes it holds your hand. Sometimes it tells you it feels safer when you're near. I entered that island believing I was protected by the man I loved. I left knowing the greatest threat had never come from the dark hallways, the power outages, or the weapons hidden in the shadows. It had been standing beside me the entire time.
So, that's the end of this story, but there are plenty of other great ones right here. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that little bell.